Everybody looks super duper. We're still going to work on Sarah's whole situation.
Especially you, Jeff.
Thanks. It's all because of you, really. Maximizing myself for the moment to welcome you back to the Heroic Council. My name is Jeff Gibbard, and I am joined with all three of the superheroes on the council today. I have with me Parshal Tashi, I have Tim Yulee, and I have Sarah O'Hannison. And today we're going to be doing the episode you've all been waiting for, that you've been asking for. You haven't said it out loud, you haven't commented anywhere or actually specifically asked for it, but I know somewhere in your mind you've been thinking, I wish they would do this episode. This episode is going to be the Imposter Syndrome episode. So we're going to get on it and we're going to talk about it. Remember that you can join the Heroic Council every single Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to talk through a bunch of issues that are relevant to you as a person, as a business person. And, we'll answer your questions if you've got them. Just like this episode is the thing that you were thinking but didn't say out loud. We're going to do that today. If you want to subscribe to the show, which we highly encourage that you do, you go to superheroinstitute.org/heroic. That's where you can find a way to subscribe via YouTube, via Periscope, via anywhere that we stream at Facebook, either on the group or on the page, as well as all of our podcasting channels, whatever you like to use best. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. Let's start that intro that gets everybody hyped. This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm. Just makes me want to like rip my shirt off right now. It's so hyped. God, I love it, people. What is up, superheroes? It is so nice to see you all.
You too, Jeff.
Yeah, you too.
Good.
Thanks.
Nice not to be abandoned for another week.
We have had a tough run of things, haven't we? Like, we've all had to go our separate ways at times. But you know what I'm appreciative of? I'm appreciative of the fact that we kept this going. Even though not all four superheroes could be here at once, we still kept the whole thing on the rails. I listened to the episode that I was not a part of, really enjoyed it. Despite me not being a part of it, that's typically very rough for me to enjoy things that I'm not a part of. No, but it was really great. And I'm super glad that we're all finally back together. And I hope that we can keep this running for quite a while. So today we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, something that I know everybody and their mother is completely familiar with. I've interacted with some of the biggest names in the speaker industry, and they all talk about it. And I was like, say what? But it's a thing that we all deal with. So I figured a good place for us to start was just to, one, I think, kind of talk about like what is imposter syndrome, what exactly is that thing? And then talk about, do we think that this is something that anyone can possibly avoid? And then just kind of talk about some of our experiences and how we've learned to deal with those in some of those high pressure situations. So let's start here. Imposter syndrome. Who wants to take a crack at kind of defining what that would mean to you? Because I'm interested in how maybe our definitions of what this thing is.
I can go. This is Sarah. So I think that imposter syndrome is this feeling of like doubt, I'm a fraud, I'm inadequate, that hinders pretty much everybody at one point or another.
Anything to add to it?
I'd also add just this doesn't really change her definition at all, but I'd also add it like as you're going through your career, there will be moments where you have to essentially project a level of expertise and competence in some things that you may not feel. That there's a lot of stuff you don't totally know about that field, and so that can give you. That can push even deeper those feelings of imposter syndrome. I know, I felt that way like many times in my career, and it definitely drifts away, but it's still there.
Parshal, anything to add to?
Yeah, to me, I think of it just being like, you feel like you're a fake. You feel like, what you have to say or do in some ways is not the elite status or whatever. It's kind of like a belittling of how you see yourself and just kind of your conclusion is that you're a fake. You must be a fake. And it just sort of drives sort of this negative way that I guess we see ourselves.
So the one thing that I would add to it, I was interested to hear the way that each of you explained it, but the one thing that I would probably add to it, whoops, hold on, I just got rid of Sarah accidentally. Whoop, did it again. Okay, there we go. I have multiple boxes on my screen. I'm not sure why that one's still there. Doesn't matter. Okay, so the one thing that I would add, there it goes. It's all better. The one thing that I would add that I didn't hear in any of your descriptions is that it's something that is completely made up, and it is based on nothing other than your own insecurity. So I think that's like a super important part about imposter syndrome and fraud syndrome or any other names that it has to it, is that I think that it's super important to highlight that it is based on absolutely no real evidence. It's based on a feeling, and that we all experience it and feel it in these moments where we're likely we've been hired as experts, right? So like all of the evidence would support that because we are being paid as the expert, we've been invited as the expert, all of the different things. We come into that, even though all of the evidence supports that, saying, I do not belong here. So it's like, it's actually counter to all of the evidence that would be presented to you. So I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about imposter syndrome. And so
can I actually push back on that just a little bit?
You can, absolutely.
Not like 100%. Because I think, depending on where you are in your career and your knowledge about things, like I could say pretty confidently that early in my career, I was really learning as I went along. You know what I mean? And I'm not implying that they shouldn't have hired me or anything along those lines, but I definitely feel like now I'm speaking from a deeper level of experience than I was before. So I feel like in some ways, I'm not saying I was an imposter, but some of the insecurities that are attached to imposter syndrome may have been somewhat justified based on where I was at the time, if that makes sense.
I think that's fair. And I don't want to,
I'm not like 100% like being like, oh, what you said isn't true. I was just
I know. And I just want to clarify kind of the point that I was trying to make there was not so much that like you absolutely know what you're doing as much as the other person has hired you to, and like, it's not like you're 100% equipped every single time. Like we all feel that way, right? I'm not saying that. What I'm suggesting is that if you look at the evidence, the situation that you're probably in where you're experiencing this feeling, you've probably been put in that position because someone believes something about your level of expertise. And if we even take that example that you just gave and you look back in your career, any of the times where you maybe felt like, I'm not exactly sure if I'm qualified for this or if I can actually do this thing I sold. Out of that, let's say out of every 10 times, how many of the times did you fail to actually come through? In my experience of working with you, I can't think of a single time. So if you look at not only the evidence before the fact, but also you look at what the outcome of it is, you actually did figure it out. It makes me think of, there was this quote by Steve Jobs that I'm going to find real quick, because I think that it's an ideal quote for this particular thing. So talk amongst yourselves for a moment while I find this. Because I think it's really good.
But I think it's really one thing that came to mind. It's like, based on your definition, Jeff, is that it's all driven by a story that you tell yourself based off of, whatever information or evidence, as you said, Jeff, is there. We take that and then we make up some way that we generated ourselves. And that I think kicks that. And I think it seems like it becomes a syndrome or something to really title when it's like, excessive and it just completely drives you. And that I can definitely relate to. Just like it just drives you because you're just so fearful that you're going to lose out. You're going to miss out on business. You're going to get fired. You're going to do a horrible job. Like for me, those are the things that just I've noticed recently, just sort of always running back in my head sometimes. But if I know and I'm looking at the evidence, there's a different story I could come away with than what I'm telling myself. You know what I mean? So I just think, the spin that you put on it, Jeff, was really interesting. It's like we're generating. It's not like somebody else is, putting it on us. We're the ones who are looking at data and then putting a story to that data. And whatever story we put on it, it determines how we feel, how we go about the rest of our day and week and treat everybody and all this stuff.
Yeah. And the quote I was looking for that I can't find, I don't want to waste too much time looking for it, but it's a quote by Steve Jobs where he was giving you, if you've ever seen that, it was a Stanford commencement speech, I think, that he was giving. But he basically said something along the lines of like, the thing that's really important to recognize is that all of the great inventions, all of the great innovations of all time were created by people who are no smarter than you and me. They're people that basically were just figuring it out. Nobody has it all together. Like nobody has their act completely together. And I think that what imposter syndrome really is it's the delta between the false expectation that there are people that have that they have everything together and that you don't, right? That you're fundamentally different from the other people who didn't have their stuff together but did amazing things. That's tends to be how I look at it. So like let's actually rewind a bit. Let's talk a little bit about experiences of fraud syndrome. And I think what's interesting as I listened to what Tim was saying was how it actually changed for you over time, right? Like that there was a point in your life where you felt it more profoundly and now you feel it less frequently. Like, so like as time goes on and your experience grows and you begin to see the evidence to support that maybe you're not a fraud, that it becomes less and less. So let's look back at that. So who wants to start it off? But like talk a little bit about a time in your life where you felt like you just were a complete fraud. You didn't belong there. You didn't know what you were talking about. What you had to say was not of value. Somebody believed that you were better at what it is than you thought you were. It was just terrible. And then take us from there to what's different now.
Okay. Okay. So I think let's see. So rather than like a very specific example, I think I always had like really high expectations, not necessarily for myself, but what, like really great work looks like in particular, particularly creative work. And I would consistently compare myself to what was inspiring me to do creative work. And, early on, I wasn't, in my mind, I wasn't meeting up to my inspirations, more or less. Like my work wasn't meeting up to that expectations. So there was constant disappointment. And also in the back of my head, not even on a rational level, but more on a subconscious level, I think I always assumed that my clients and the people I worked with also expected the kind of work that I, really looked up to. And I assumed that if I wasn't delivering work on that level, then at the end of the day, they were going to be really disappointed. And to be clear, I still experience that to some extent now, but like when it does come up, I'm very aware that it's kind of like a phantom feeling, more or less, and where now, like I don't want to say anything, but generally when I see a piece of work or something of inspiration, I usually feel really confident that I could execute something on a similar level nowadays. So so it doesn't really hit me as hard, if I like now it just really comes down to, do I know the process to get that thing done? Because I'm pretty confident that if I know the process, I can get that thing done. Does that make sense?
It does. What changed? So like, how did that happen where like now you can recognize it as like a false flag, that you're able to like kind of step back and kind of see it for what it is?
Yeah.
Just when it felt very real. Because I think, the kind of the crux of this imposter syndrome thing is that it does feel exceptionally real to us. And it's a thing that stops people from being able to publish and do their best work and give their gifts to the world. So I think my hope from this episode is that we identify what that shit is and we crush it right now so that people can do their best work.
Have you ever heard of the Gap by Ira Glass? I believe. Have you ever heard that?
No.
So it's this theory on like creative development in general, and it pretty much says like people get into creative fields because they have good taste and they want to be able to create work that kind of aligns with their taste. But when you start doing the work, you don't have the skill set and the experience and the practice to really meet up to your expectations and your taste. So when you start doing the work, you're always really disappointed. You know what I mean? Because you know what you want and you can't get it at that point. And the reason why he calls it the gap is because it's the period when you realize you're not there yet to make that kind of work that you want. And that's when people quit. You know what I mean? It's like they think like, oh, I'm not good at this thing, so I'm gonna drop out and just do something else. But like what he says is like when you get there, you just have to make a lot of work. Like you just have to make a ton of work and just keep working. And then slowly and slowly you like chip away, and then you until you can reach those like initial taste expectations that you had. And and you know, like this entire like over the last 4 years, I've always made a product which in general could sell to somebody. You know what I mean? Like I might not be able to sell my work from 4 years ago to the clients I'm working with now, but in general, you know what I mean? Like there was somebody who would buy what I was selling, you know, where now like, but I guess like I see a lot of evidence. I think I actually see a lot of evidence on a regular basis of my competency, and I get my competency reinforced way more frequently than I did like 4 or 5 years ago. And that becomes kind of like almost like a positive feedback loop. You know, like the more positive feedback you get, the more you believe that you have the skill set to continue to do great work, and it kind of just reinforces itself until like those feelings of imposter syndrome slowly start to fade. You know, like I'm always working on something that I've never done before. So like it definitely creeps up on a semi-regular basis, especially when I don't have an established process and I'm just trying to figure it out as it goes along. But right now, like even when I'm at that stage, I know the only reason I'm freaking out at this moment is because I'm developing the process, you know?
Yeah, totally. It reminds me of the Dunning-Kruger curve, that idea of the gap, that like there's a point where like you learn a little bit about something and you think you're an expert. And then there's that point where you learn just a little bit more, and then you like fall to the bottom of the mountain. You're like, oh my God, there's so much more to learn. And again, of course, the problem with the Dunning-Kruger curve, as we know, is that most people stay at that top point of the mountain where they think they know everything, they freaking don't. But the point is that when you hit that kind of trough, your point from Ira Glass is you actually have to work through that. It's not give up at that point. Work through that, learn more, dig in deeper, and get to the point where you recognize that you actually know a little bit. And that's actually on the Dunning-Kruger curve. There comes a point where you've sloped it up to a point where you actually know a lot about this particular subject. But the process takes the time.
Yeah, so, and you've walked me off the cliff a couple times with that stuff, because like I got to the point where I realized how little I actually knew. You know what I mean? Like I realized how much there was and how much further I had to go still to really understand this stuff. And like I wasn't like gonna quit or anything, but like I felt really unexperienced at that point. You know what I mean? I had tipped over like where I thought I knew something, and then I realized that I didn't know that much. And then I'm like, oh, I can't be selling my work. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. You know what I mean? And then like you talked me off the cliff there a few times. And now I'm at Dunning-Kruger part 2, where I think I know everything again.
I don't think you get to knowing everything, but I think hopefully you get to a point where when you realize how little you know, that's empowering more so than discouraging, where you say, wow, there's just this whole world that I still get to explore. Like, how sad is it when you feel like you get to the point where you actually know almost everything there is to know about a particular topic, because you're done now. And if that was a thing you were excited about, like, wow, you just hit the wall, and that sucks. So Parshell, you have a background not just in being your own business owner and also working in video and dealing with all the things that creative goes through, but prior to that, you worked as a teacher, which I can't even imagine how much that alone can inspire the whole like, who am I to teach people like that? Because that's often where it comes up. I've noticed in my world, it's come up a lot, is in teaching other people. When I feel like now it's my responsibility to pass along knowledge, I'm like, well, who the hell am I? Why does anybody want to listen to me? So talk to me about some of your kind of past in dealing with it, either as a business owner, as a teacher, wherever, and kind of how imposter syndrome has kind of settled in for you and where you're at now.
Yeah. When you guys were talking, one thing that came to mind was my very first wedding gig that I got, because after teaching, you start, I started to really take on any kind of job that I could take, just to get into video, get immersed in it. Decided and I was doing this while I was still teaching, but I got my first wedding gig. I think I probably got paid like $700 or something like that for it. And I was, first of all, like shocked that I even got that. But I remember being at the wedding shoot itself, and there was a photographer there. And the photographer was like the biggest name photographer, in in the whole state, pretty much, like the whole East Coast. The guy was like bad. And I didn't really know that much about him at the time, but I remember him walking up to me and he was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" Because I had a camera too, a DSLR camera. And he asked, "All right, cool. So the lighting is looking like this today. What setting are you using? What do you have your f-stop?" And I'm like, "My what?" I was just learning. And then he said something, "Oh, you probably have it wide open, don't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do. Yep, I do." I didn't know what I was talking about. And I think at that moment, it was like just this flood of emotion, like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I should just go stick back to just teaching school. Like, why am I going to do this? But fast forward, especially when we talk about teaching and feeling like, how am I even qualified to teach? It's just so different now. I really don't have that set of fears, except now it's just on to something else and something bigger, because some of the work that I'm starting to do and produce is just like a whole other challenge. And I'm just really glad for this conversation, because it just connected me back to that moment when I felt like I don't know what I'm doing. But that project, that video that we did with that wedding is like been one of the best rated wedding videos I had done in terms of viewership. I mean, people still to this day see it and comment on it. And that for me just kind of gave some reassurance, because now I'm looking at the data and coming away with something that just kind of takes the cake for me. It's like, well, I knew I didn't feel like I could do much then, but I was still able to produce something that meant something to somebody else, and and just made a difference in that way. So that kind of relieved me, if you will. And just, I think now when I look at the kind of work that I'm taking on, I'm just reminded of that, and knowing that, it's what it's really about, which is helping other people. So it kind of calms me down a little bit. And I realize I don't have to be the full expert. You know what I mean? Like, nobody's the expert really in anything. You can't know 100%. Like you're saying, like you can't know 100% of everything. So we're all just figuring it out. You know what I mean?
And even those people that are at that level, I mean, I've talked to some people that I look at from the outside, and I think this is another piece of it, is like outside perception versus reality, right? So like I've talked with some people that are like really big name speakers and people are like top of the game, and I'll talk to them and, talking about what they're doing, they're very humble about everything. And then they'll get up and talk to the group and start talking about how they still, get nervous before every talk, and they're worried that they're going to get booed off stage and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, wow, you, the person I'm like looking up to. Wow. Okay. So this is like a thing that like we all have, and it doesn't necessarily ever go away. You just get better at recognizing it, managing it, understanding when it's real, when it's not. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate how, between you and Tim, both of you working in creative fields, it's actually kind of a unique situation because you have past work to look back on, right? And I know when I look back on any kind of past work I do, like strategies even, which is somewhat creative work, I look back on previous strategies and I'm like, that was garbage. That is the worst. I can't believe that I wrote that. That was terrible. And meanwhile, all the clients were always happy when I delivered these strategies. They're like, wow, this is really impressive.
Yes.
But I look back on it now, knowing what I know now, and I look back and I'm like, oh, that's garbage. That was terrible. I left out these like different things and I didn't explain it graphically, and I could have this and I could have that. So it's interesting, especially as creatives, is that like you're dealing with it in real time of like, am I good enough to do this thing? And Tim talks a lot about the process of like when he's delivering work, there's like the whole beginning phase of it where you're like, I hate everything. Everything's terrible. And then it starts to come together and you're like, oh, this is actually pretty good. I like this. Yeah. So there's like this funny process for creatives where you like deal with it in advance of the work. You deal with it while you're putting the work together. As the work comes together, you put it out there and you have like this momentary thing where you're like, this is pretty good. And then after that, you move on to the next thing and you start learning more. And then that work gets recontextualized in your current scope of knowledge. And you're like, if I could go back and do it again, I would do this, and that. But you never could have done that back then because you didn't have that knowledge. So it's like, it's such an interesting particular challenge for the creative world.
Yeah,
Sarah.
It doesn't really seem to go away, but yeah.
Yeah, like, sure.
But it's there.
So Sarah, you were dropped into a leadership role in marketing early in your career.
Yeah.
in your first job, basically. So basically, like, you worked your way into this thing and you wound up at the point where you're the CMO of this organization that was at the time, like, what, 25, 27 years old, right? Like, so it's an organization that has a track record of success, well-known, does its thing. And you come right out of college, move up the ranks. How many times per week, per month did you encounter the "do I belong here? Why is anyone listening to me" sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, you read my mind, Jeff, because I was like, this is the perfect thing to talk about. And you mentioned time, and it is amazing to me as I reflect back how long it took, but also, that time really makes a difference. And age, wisdom, call it what you will. But it was almost like over time, I got my place at the table where I felt like I deserved to be there. So going back, it's interesting. When I was really young and entering my career, I was blessed to have leaders of our organization who brought me to the table, right? Like, I had a seat at the table. I was sort of thrown into a leadership role pretty quickly. And I'm, like I said, really grateful for that experience. But it is shocking now, and as I look back on how many times I think, God, I was so nervous to be there, and I was so scared, and I was so intimidated as this one, young, two, female, being in these rooms sometimes. And I'm so grateful for it because, you're diving into the deep end is how you're going to learn to swim, and I did. But it really wasn't anything that I could do aside from take the time and kind of earn my stripes for myself, right? Like, but I gave myself those stripes, and it was such a personal and a feeling that I was projecting on myself over time. I just felt like I was too young, too female to be there. And then over time, that just sort of started to dissipate. I got more and more confidence every time I said something in a meeting and someone said, "That was a great idea," or "I'm so glad you were here today," or "Thanks for being at this dinner party." But yeah, it really took a lot of time for me to get there.
It's such an interesting point that you brought up there, though, that a lot of this actually, despite being so internal, like, there's so many things that's on you, like how you react to things. You kind of brought up the point of, like, being a female in the room and being thrust into this role. So being young and being female. And then Parshell, I'm sure you've had instances where, female, Black, young, all of those things coming against you. I've obviously never had to deal with any of those particular things, but the fact that so much of this is internal, that what we face, the externalities can actually condition you to have a harder time overcoming that like, you're used to potentially not getting those kudos and maybe somebody else does, or not being able, being the person in the room that's being told to take notes rather than actually participate. So there's all of these different things that, in terms of, like, how we as leaders in our own companies create a culture that helps to kind of suppress the imposter syndrome instinct that I guess we all have. That's something that I actually hadn't considered as part of this conversation, partly because that's not something that I'd ever really encountered. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Parshell or Sarah, do you have any more to say about that particular thread?
Well, sorry. I was just going to say, just as a quick resolution, what I would try to do then, once I got my confidence in this space, I would make sure that I was inviting people to participate and saying, "I want you here because of this reason. I want you to participate. I want to know." And I found myself then, as a growing manager, really needing to draw that out of my younger team members. And they would sit quietly, and I said, "You got to participate because I want you to. I really value what you have to say in this space, and your opinion matters because of X, Y, Z." And I found myself really leaning into that and helping them grow as a byproduct.
Love it. Parshell?
I was going to say, it wasn't until I moved to Philly that I really, I guess what you can say, I really started to force myself to face these stories that I was telling myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that looked like, and some things happened by happenstance. I could have denied the request, but I got invited to the Pyramid Club or going to different places where there was a certain type of clientele that I could meet with and network with to grow my business. And going to the Pyramid Club, it was the first time I walked up in there, I was like, whoa, am I supposed to be in here? You know what I mean? And that's when it exposed me. And I decided, you know what? I'm not going to keep telling myself the story because there's something here for me. And that's when I just started to I joined the Pyramid Club. I was like, going to networking events. I would purposely go to events. In fact, there was a point in time where I was really heavy pursuing like the trucking industry for, getting work and doing video with them. And so I decided to go to a trucking conference in Florida to network and meet with people there. I'm the only Black person there, first of all, let alone women. It was a thing for me. And so I think that over time, I forced myself to show up in these places where it's unlikely for me to be. Here in San Diego, where I live now, like pickleball was an arena for that for me too, because I'm with all these like older white people. And it actually really helped to break down a lot of stories that I would tell myself about why I don't belong there, and I don't fit in. But the more I started to just force myself into these environments, the more I would actually connect with people and realize, like, what was I tripping about? Like, people are cool. But I think that the key to it is that I thought that I was worthy to be there. And I think that's what, possibly attracted other people to see the same thing. Mm-hmm. I started it, and then people would see that. That's a really big thing for me. Like, I want to go on the cruise ship with all the retired people and whatever, and just be myself and to be cool and to find common connection, because I don't know. It's a great challenge for me, and it gets me out of that story that I usually put up for myself. So
I love the way that you phrase that about the story, because I think that if you really put it through that lens, imposter syndrome makes a lot more sense. Is that you're telling yourself a story about where your place is, where your place isn't, what your competency is, what it isn't, whether or not you belong in a place or whether or not you don't. And I think even just when I look at my own experience with imposter syndrome, it's when I recognize that was a story and it wasn't necessarily true. And I gave myself permission to create a new story. And the new story was that I did belong there. And the new story was that I actually am pretty good at what I do. And the new story was that I didn't have to be perfect, because perfect's an illusion anyway. And that I could just be open about what I do and don't know. And then all of a sudden, a lot of those feelings kind of began to like fade away like vapor. And I think that, so I just had a podcast with Christina Blacken, and we talked about her work in narrative intelligence. That's going live this coming Wednesday on Shareable. Amazing conversation, but so much of what she's talking about in terms of issues of diversity, inclusion, and representation in workplaces, I think the same sort of thinking around the stories we tell ourselves and how that impacts our behavior could work in this same context. So I really like the way that you frame that. One thing that's common amongst all four of us that I'm curious your take on as it relates to this is that all four of us are entrepreneurs. Sarah, the newest to the game, but taken to the entrepreneur game like a fish to water. All of us are used to now carving out our own path. We all have to motivate ourselves to get out of bed, and do the work, get out of, creating our own schedule, not being told what to do. We have all of these pressures of the autonomy, it is freedom, but with that freedom comes the pressure on yourself to kind of work within that boundary of freedom. I don't want to make this like entrepreneurs have to carry their crosses or anything, but like I do feel like there's something unique to entrepreneurs in dealing with imposter syndrome in a way that maybe they're people who have a day-to-day grind job don't have to in the same exact way. Did any of you, does that echo with any of you, or am I just like trying to make it so that entrepreneurs are like, more specialer?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's weird because I always feel super bipolar about it, because like I will at the same time be like, I hate this, but then like I don't want to do anything else at the exact same moment, like constantly. Like I could be having like the worst client meetings in the world and be stuck on the worst projects and not feel like I'm not making enough and feel like I'm like really stressed out about what comes next. You know what I mean? Like, where's my next project coming from? But simultaneously I'm like, yeah, but working in an office sounds so horrible. So but in general, yeah, I guess the hard part was really getting going. Like, because in the beginning, there's just the sense that like I don't know if I'm going to be able to feed myself next week, you know what I mean, or next month.
Has that stopped for
And
any of you? Because that still doesn't stop for me. And like I'm having an amazing.
wait, that hasn't stopped for you?
No, it never stops. It never ever stops for me. I literally every day feel like wolves are chasing me and they're ready to tear me apart and kick me out of my house. And every day. And like again, I'm having a great year, but I feel like at any moment it will all come crashing down. So I'm curious if any of you have gotten over that hump, because I have not.
However,
it's
I think entrepreneurs like that though.
Oh no, I live for this.
That's what I mean. I think it's like it's not a hump you're ever gonna get over because
I don't like it at all. It feels like I have like acid pouring through my veins when I'm like paranoid about that stuff. Like I hate that feeling. I mean, it's still not enough to make me be like, oh, I wish I could have like a 401k. You know what I mean? Or you know what I mean? But I don't know. Like this month in particular, I feel pretty good. But like but in the back of my head, I'm like, but am I going to feel this way next month? Like it's yeah, but because I can say like 6 months ago, like especially at the beginning of the pandemic, like man, was I paranoid back then,
Sarah, you're new to this. You're dealing with that acid pumping through your veins. How am I going to serve it? But like again, you're taking this to like fish to water. How are you managing that after a career of having safety and security?
Yeah, but I like the adrenaline and I like the fuel that comes into my body. Like you get a win and it's like I've never done a drug in my life, but like it's like a hit of something. I drink a lot of coffee. I'll relate it to that. And I think that's what's a cool motivator. And like you're making it for yourself and you're doing it and you're creative and you can see the fruits of your labor. The lesson I have learned very quickly, which I am grateful to have learned this so fast, is that this is just about people doing business with and helping other people. And I came from a small, medium-sized business environment, and now I'm working with larger corporations. And I think one of the things I learned fast was that these are still just people, and it doesn't matter these titles, fancy titles, where they work, what fancy office building they may have come from before COVID. They just want help with getting their stuff done and being able to spend more time with their families. Like we all kind of want the same things, and that's very uniting. And I feel grateful to have noticed that and recognized that pretty fast from a ability to sell perspective.
Partiality.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I remember that when I had quit teaching and I started, this entrepreneur world, it's like I woke up that day like, okay, now what, And my mom was the one who, because she, most of my family are like now we're more entrepreneurial, but at the time, no one else had done anything like that. It was go to school, get a job, and that's just what you do. So at this point, I had taught high school for about 6 or 7 years. And for 3 of those years, me and my mom taught at the same school. That's pretty interesting.
Was that cool?
It had its good and bad.
Yeah.
It's good and bad. But I remember that once I quit teaching and I was doing the entrepreneur thing, like she would call me like around like 11 o'clock or whatever. She was on her break. And she would be like, oh, you must just be waking up. It was just this assumption that, oh, you just, since you didn't have to go to work today, because she would be on top of me about stuff. Yeah. She was like, well, since you have to go to work today, you're probably just sleeping in. What, you just getting up, And in actuality, I was getting up earlier than I had when I was working, and I started this development of like getting up early and just kind of adjusting my schedule. But it was like, as far as time went in, there's no comparison. Teaching after a while, you know what you're going to teach that day. You got your worksheets planned out. It's more of an admin thing after a point of time. You're just managing a schedule of content that you're sharing. And you got your worksheets that you can test, and you got a great test. It's just more administrative because you know what you're teaching. And so anyway, it was a lot of work, but being an entrepreneur, it was like 2 to 3 times that. And I knew that for me going into it, I was concerned that it wouldn't be as easy as everything else had been in my life. I did the stuff that I was good at, teaching I'm good at. And so that's just what I did. And so this new thing, it just was, it was so different, but I just found myself just dedicating a lot more of my time and energy to it.
That story.
Yeah, that's the other
resonates with me
thing.
so hard.
Like you're never really off, you know? I mean, like you take days off, but every time I take a day off, like I decide like even if I work all weekend, you know what I mean? And I decide to take a day off on like a Wednesday, I still feel like everything's gonna come crumbling down today because I took a day off on a Wednesday. You know what I mean?
Oh my
like
God.
everything's gonna fall apart now, and everybody's gonna know. Everybody's out there working right now, and I'm just sitting here doing nothing on the couch. It's like,
It's like
and
it gets worse and worse.
yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's like 9 a.m. or 8 p.m. You know what I mean? Like a client email comes in, you're like even if you're not going to respond to it then, but there's a client email in your inbox right now, and you have to deal with that, and it just never ends. And I'm not complaining. That's not a complaint.
Yeah.
Because I really still like the lifestyle a lot. But it's a perpetual machine that you have to keep going.
The two of your
It
stories
really is.
super resonated with me. Like partially the conversation with your mom. I remember that I had started my agency and I had been running my agency, working for myself for several years at this point. And my mom was like, "You need to get a job." And I was like, I started a company and I have people. How are you not impressed yet? Right? Like it's just like a mind-boggling thing to me. And I think kind of to the point of, what you're both saying about like this, people have this assumption of what it looks like because you make your own schedule that like you just like your life is actually easier potentially. And I don't think everybody thinks this. I mean, I think a lot of people know entrepreneurs are maniacs, but I think some people have this assumption that you just kind of like, you have total freedom. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I think that the point of what Tim's making about like an email comes in at 8 and you notice it, and that maybe you have trouble falling asleep because you're like, should I answer that? I will say this though. One thing that I did in starting 2020, because I had my agency, got acquired. And after I left that agency, I was like, I took some time off. I tried to think about like, what do I want to do? How do I want to do this? And one of the things I made a commitment to is that in starting this next business, I was going to be much more clear about my dividing lines. I was going to be much more rigid about the space between when I'm on and when I'm not. And I got to tell you, for this entire year, I've been very, very committed to that. I've done it. And it has changed my entire life, because I remember there were times where I would work, into the night, 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., getting work done. And I no longer do that stuff, but once in a while when I'm feeling inspired. But it's not because I feel the pressure from a client, because I say, these are the times that I work, these are the times I don't. It's in the onboarding email. I'm very clear about who I will and won't work with. And I think one of the pieces of advice I kind of wanted to come into this episode with was kind of the resolution that I found for imposter syndrome is the more in sync you can become with your brand of like who you want to be in this world and what you value, and like being congruent across everything that you're doing, the more easy it is to avoid that imposter syndrome, because you don't feel like you're actually lying in any sense whatsoever, which is, I think, where the imposter syndrome comes from, is like this small sense of dishonesty of like, I'm not necessarily as good as I said I was, right? Whereas I feel like if you are very clear on what you're good at and you're willing to say, I'm good at this thing, and you say, I love to work at these times because that's when I'm energized. So that's when I work, and I don't work at these times. And I don't like to work with people that fit this sort of personality profile, but I work with these type of people. And the more you can do all of that so that everything you're doing is open, honest, transparent, out in the open, and like aligns with what you're about, it becomes so much more freeing, because you no longer have to have this conflict of like, well, am I saying something that doesn't feel right to me? Like everything you're saying is exactly who you are. Like I never have to think when I say Spider-Man's my favorite superhero, like, do I feel weird about that? No, I don't. He's amazing. I can't wait to play the next game. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is like that, like fraud is bad, right? Like if you're scheming, if you're being dishonest, that is when it's just like, don't even go there and cross that line.
Real fraud syndrome.
Real fraud. But as an imposter syndrome, like you feel almost at that level, but you're not. And I think that's a good thing for people to keep in mind. Like, are you being honest? Are you being truthful about what you can do? Are you living into your best capabilities, your zone of genius? Like, then it's okay. Like, I think that's just a good thing to keep in mind. Like, if you're being true to who you are and your talents, and you're being honest and you're there to help people, you're all good.
Yeah. And even like back around to like my original disagreement with you, Jeff. Now that you say that, like,
hold on, you froze up.
Years ago, I was.
Okay, there you go. Now your audio's off. Wait.
Oh no.
Okay, there you go. Now start over with where you're from.
All right. Just to bring it back around with my original disagreement with you, and how at the end of the day, you may be correct here. I think I always felt like I had the pressure to promote myself as something better, like more experienced than I was, at the time, where it was okay to be where I was at. And I would probably be able to be somewhat like successful earlier on in my career without having to be like, I guess I'm way better than I actually am right now. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys know me, like I'm kind of I boast a bit. I'm a little very confident, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. But like for the most part, I think the reason why I'm able to ever do that is because you'll never hear me do that about something that I don't know about at all. So I try to, if I'm in my zone, I'm willing to say, you know what, I think that I can make this work because I have all of the evidence in the past that typically I'm able to make that work. And I would say the same for every one of you on here, that if you said you were going to do a thing, I'm pretty sure not only are you going to show up and come back to meet expectations, you're probably going to exceed whatever somebody else's expectations were, because you each have a drive to do great work and to bring your best selves to the work that you're doing, kind of to what Sarah was saying. So I think that that's kind of one of the keys there. And then one of the other points I wanted to make, and I give a shout out to someone who's not with us on this call today, but who I believe we all know, my friend Q had a really interesting conversation with me recently about the kind of the difference between time and distance, right? So the idea being that maybe it takes you a lot of time to get to a point where you feel comfortable, but maybe it's actually not the time. Maybe it's the distance, meaning that let's say you have to shoot 28 videos before you feel a certain way. Those 28 videos could take you 28 months. It could take you 28 days. So it's the distance of 28 videos that is really actually what it's about, is the experience. It's the depth of doing the thing, going through the motions so that you feel like you actually have the experience to be able to feel comfortable in doing the work, right? So maybe it's not time. There's probably a function of time somewhere in there, but maybe it's actually the distance, that it's about leaning in, which I think is how Sarah described it, leaning into that discomfort of whether or not you know a thing, leaning into it and just doing the work so that you get over that hump and feel good about it.
I also think it helps, not to get too like philosophical, but to manifest what you're trying to achieve. And it's not to be a fraud or to be dishonest about what you're doing. But as you're just getting started out, or as you're changing careers, or you're in a new position, you have to kind of live into where you want to be. They used to say, dress for the job you want to have, not the job that you do have. And I think that's an example of it. Like, if you want to be somewhere, you have to start practicing that daily. And Jeff, you and I had a conversation about this yesterday, living into the life you want every day. And some of that can make imposter syndrome actually worse, because you're like, I'm not really this thing yet, but I want to be. And I think that's important, and hopefully an encouraging thing for people to think about. Like, you got to live into it and lean. I keep saying lean into it, but I think that's a really good way to kind of help you get to that next step where you want to be.
Yeah, like that's huge. I know, and probably for literally everything, but in video in particular, if I want to get paid to do projects with more complex lighting setups, you know what I mean? Then I need to start bringing that to the shoots that I'm doing right now, and showing that I have that work. Like, because if I'm not doing that now, then I'll never get hired for it, and
it's easy to get stuck.
Yeah.
It's easy to get stuck saying, I want to do those projects with better lighting. I want to one day when I have more time. It's like that day's never coming, but it's, Tim, what you're saying is so critical. Like, you got to do it now.
Yeah.
I was thinking, Jeff, you broke down some math there when you mentioned the time or the distance and time, and distance divided by distance divided by time is speed. Yeah. And so I thought about, it's like, well, regardless if you want to do the 28 videos or whatever the content is over the rest of your life, or 30 years, 40 years, or in a week, And I think that that's what it's about, is like making progress, being in motion, going to the next thing, and whatever that is better than where you are. We're filling that gap. It's getting more and more rich, and we can just progress. So as long as we're moving, I mean, I think that that's everything. And the thing about being an entrepreneur is that you have to take responsibility for that. It's even more so. I think, you have to just like jump in and be like, all right, this is what's happening. I'm moving forward, putting my foot on the gas as fast or as slow as I want to go. Like, I think that's where we get caught up. I'm like, oh my God, like so-and-so is going so much faster, or they're already way ahead, or whatever the circumstances are. But we're all on the same road, I guess, especially as like entrepreneurs and people. Like, let's just be in motion and go from one thing to the next. You know what I mean?
I love that I completely unintentionally used that example after last week's episode was how you filmed and edited 25 videos in 4 hours. I didn't even piece that together, that like I was giving your episode a shout out.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
so true. I think speed is really important. That's what's happening, is like there's everything's becoming faster to do through technology. And it's like, I know it excites me about how much could actually be done with what's available in front of us. So part of me too, and this is like an advice piece that I wanted to share, because we're like sharing tips about this imposter syndrome thing. Something that was really helpful for me with this was this experience of, okay, I'm in this bottle. The bottle is me. The bottle has a label, but I can't see what's on the bottle because I'm inside of it. And I'm taking the opportunity to like ask more people, like, what is it that they see? Like, what's on my bottle? Like, what do you see? Because I don't see it. I'm just being me. I'm just doing whatever I feel. But like, what do you see? And using that to sort of formulate even more so, what is it that I'm known for? What is it that I'm good at? So forth and so on. But the thing I was going to recommend is, so around the start of this year, I started to think, I was like in a huge transition, and I was like, you know what? I should just go find a job. I was like, I'm just going to go find a job and just do that. And I was serious about it. And I ended up working with somebody who's like a resume writer. And I knew that the kind of work I wanted to do was something that's clearly in video, maybe like running a video department or something like that with a company. So I hooked up with one of my partners, and I invested in getting my resume done because I would need it for this new opportunity. All the stuff that she asked me about what I did, and developing this really great like 1-2 sheet document of my experiences, what I know how to do, and all. It's like I didn't even it was not ever in my awareness. I always thought, just not good enough. I know the taste. I know like what I want to see happen, but I'm not there. So I always we always downplay stuff. But ever since doing that resume and like getting that done, even though I'm looking for stuff if it's there, if I get something or not, I'm good. But when I look at that resume and I'm like, oh man, like I really like it's now I'm looking at the evidence, I'm looking at this sheet of data that tells me the things that I've accomplished over the last 10 years of my career doing this. And I can't shy away from that. I can't think, I'm not that good or whatever. It's like part of that story that I tell myself is like, the volume went down by like half by doing that. So especially if you're in a creative field and you've been an entrepreneur or something like that, like if you get somebody just to help and like update your resume, like ask you all the questions about what you've actually done, I'm definitely surprised. I still look at it like, oh my God, I can't believe, those are the things that I accomplished, and those are the companies I work with and all that. I just completely downplay it. But going through that experience, not anymore. So that's made a big difference in terms of not seeing myself as like this imposter. I have at least this document that I can reference to say, well, look at this. And I have to look at it for myself too. So it was a powerful exercise, and I recommend that.
I love that. So as a kind of a wrap up point on that, and I'm going to ask both Tim and Sarah for both of you to also kind of share your like wrap up points on imposter syndrome, any advice you would have. But just to button that one up is that if you look at the evidence, which is something that my therapist tells me all the time, but look at the evidence and then kind of to your point, I think one of the things you kind of snuck in there at the end is by documenting it and even having it as an artifact for you to look at can sometimes be a way to actually check yourself in those moments and say, you know what? I'm good, and then be able to move into it. So I really like that as a kind of final tip. Sarah or Tim, who wants to go next on the wrap up?
I can go, Tim. I was going to say something actually quite similar, in that if you can look back at your past and realize all the amazing things that have helped you get there, that you yourself have indeed accomplished, like, it propels you even further forward. And another good way to do that, I think having someone help you with your resume is great. I have been through that process also. But just asking friends and other previous colleagues to maybe write a LinkedIn recommendation for you and just hear what people have to say. It is self-serving, but it's a really positive way to see, what do other people actually think about me? And it's a nice way to boost up that confidence a little bit. We all need that from time to time.
Yeah, I know some people who have like I don't know, forget what she called it, but it was like a hug folder, and it's basically like all of the cards that people write you and like all of the things. So like when you feel like you need a boost, you jump in there and you're like, oh, these people like me.
Yeah, we all need that. I mean, come on.
I save them all. I need every little bit of it. Tim?
Yeah, I think you really, 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 really need external feedback, because I think in general, people are really bad at being able to assess their own strengths, weaknesses, and just like where they're actually at. I can only speak from my own experience. Like, I'm more likely to minimize my strengths and weaknesses. So like whenever I get the opportunity to have some like legitimate external feedback, that's really helpful, because I feel like everything else is borderline a hallucination. Like, they're just stories you're telling yourself.
Yeah.
The other thing, Jeff, I did that might be interesting for people is I did do a personality. It's not a personality test. It's a skills assessment abilities test.
This is the Gallup one?
No, it's called the Highlands Abilities. And we can put a link to it in the show notes, but it was really a cool test about your abilities. And sometimes I keep that report near my desk, because sometimes I just need to go back and look at it. And it's almost like, oh yeah, I am good at that.
No, I totally dig that. And it's going to dovetail nicely into my final piece of advice. But I think there's kind of a two-tier strategy that I would encourage everyone to implement to completely obliterate imposter syndrome. And this is you don't obliterate it to this extent where you just never deal with it again, but you have now the tools to completely eradicate it when you encounter it. And the two tools are this: one, radical self-acceptance, and the second is radical self-awareness. So I'll touch on those both really quickly. So radical self-acceptance. When I was like 13 or 14 years old, all I wanted was to be like 6 feet tall, brown hair, handsome, fit. And I looked in the mirror one day and I said, welp, that's not going to happen. So since this is what I'm stuck with, and there's absolutely no changing this outside of like the little bits I can do with what I got, this is it. So I might as well just accept it and appreciate it. And I distinctly remember that from in my early teens, that moment. And it was a pivotal kind of moment in my life to just say, this is who you are. So like, whatever it is, right? And I've carried that throughout other periods of my life where like I recognize I'm a terrible employee, right? So that's the self-awareness piece, right? So if you're radically self-accepting that you are who you are, and that you're aware of what you are, kind of to your point, I love all the personality tests, because it validates for me that it's okay that I am the way that I am, because that is who I am. That's how I am. I don't expect somebody who's like, accountant that's really good at spreadsheets and making sure a budget is balanced to be able to think creatively the way that I do, right? We all have different skills. We all have different things we bring to the table. So if you accept yourself for who you are, and then you're aware of who you are, and anything that you don't like there that you're willing to attempt to change, it gives you the sort of grounding to say this is what it is, and you don't get caught in that tension between what you wish was true versus what is true. So when you accept what you're good at, you accept what you're bad at, and you do all that, and you just say it is what it is, you're willing then to be honest about those things with the people that you work with, so you don't have to feel like you're putting on airs that don't really exist and aren't really true. So I would say that those are the two most important things in my mind. And then when you have that, when you're totally comfortable with yourself and you seek that external validation and people give you things, those are opportunities for you to learn and grow, already knowing who you are and what you're good at and when you're not. So when somebody says, well, you're not very good at organization and project management, you might go, yeah, no, I'm terrible at it. And that's actually not my thing. So like, what information to let kind of in versus what you keep out based upon what your goals are as a human being. So this has been the Imposter Syndrome episode. I had a really good time talking about this with you guys. I really did. It was really, really cool. Thank you all for coming in, being super vulnerable about it. I don't think that we set up who our what are you really into. So I'm just going to call on someone, and this is going to be like a super organic what are you totally into right now.
Jeff, if it helps you, I thought of one.
Did you? Well, I'm not going to call on you then. You're going to give us yours next. So it's between Tim and Parshell. Tim and Parshell. Parshell, what are you into right now?
I am into right now. I've been diving into learning about production, but on a much bigger scale, entertainment stuff. What actually happens, and learning how to apply that to internet media and online media. So I've really been into that. I have a new concept that I'm working on right now. To give a little sneak peek to it, this is imagine the Muppets as entrepreneurs. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh my God, I'm super into this. I would watch the hell out of that.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah, you can go next. What's yours? What are you into right now?
So I'm into, and this is thanks to you, I'm into Dave's Killer Bread.
That's thanks to Tim. So you got that from
Oh,
me.
Tim.
Yeah, no, that's all Tim. Dave's Killer Bread's the best bread I've ever had in my entire life.
And I think what's cool about it too is that they're living into their mission and purpose, and
100%.
they are, I think a lot of brands, and we talked about branding a little while ago, but brands get stuck on they're trying to be authentic, they're trying to be cool, and Dave's Killer Bread is actually doing it. So shout out to them.
Absolutely. Just curious, which one? I'm a huge fan of the green one, which I think is
the green. It's 7 grains or 9 grains. Yeah,
so
the more grains, the better.
I introduced my fiance to Dave's Killer Bread, and she was like, "It's bread."
I don't understand that. Did you give her the green? The green one's the best one.
We tried I've introduced her 3 different kinds. And
I don't understand this.
she doesn't not like it. She just doesn't get the hype. Yeah, I don't know either. Yeah.
I'm surprised by this.
So good bread, cool mission. I'm into it.
Absolutely.
Talking about make you second guess yourself, right?
Yeah, serious. No, Tim, you were right on this. You are not an imposter. That is damn good bread. I don't think we have a topic set for next week yet, but we have a whole bunch of topics on the board. So I'm sure we'll come up with something that is totally kick-ass and totally awesome. I want to thank our viewers who tuned in live. I want to thank our listeners who are listening to the podcast after the fact or watching the video later. You're all really amazing. You are not imposters. You are all very good-looking people, very intelligent, and you make good decisions on the media that you consume. So thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Heroic Council, where we talk each week about issues that affect you in your life, in your business. We give you permission to be you. We give you permission to go out there, thrive and grow and be the superhero you were meant to be. Subscribe on any of the different places where you can subscribe by going to superheroinstitute.org/heroic and tune in every week, Fridays at 1:00 to see 1 or 4 of us or anywhere in between talking about cool stuff. Thank you so much. And it might be one day we might have a 1. But appreciate you listeners. Deuces. See you next week.